Have you ever looked out at the ocean and felt like it was staring back? It's a vast, empty expanse, but sometimes you see something you can't explain. Tonight's story is one of those times. It's a tale whispered among old sailors, a warning about the reflections you might find on the water. Imagine a grand passenger liner, the Serenity, slicing through a sea as smooth and dark as polished glass. The night was clear, the stars bright, and a gentle breeze carried the sounds of laughter and music across the decks. Families were strolling, couples were dancing, and everything felt perfect. Too perfect. A little girl named Lily, no older than 7, was standing by the railing with her parents, her face pressed against the cool metal. She was tracing constellations with her finger when she suddenly stopped and pointed out toward the horizon. "Look, Daddy," she said, her voice clear in the quiet night. "There's another ship over there. It looks just like ours." Her father chuckled, ruffling her hair. "That's just our reflection on the water, sweetie. See? The lights are the same." He and his wife shared a knowing smile, but Lily shook her head, her little brow furrowed. "No," she insisted. "It's too far away to be a reflection, and it's moving with us." Curious, now, a few other passengers who had overheard the conversation peered into the darkness. At first, they saw nothing but the endless black water, but then, as their eyes adjusted, they saw it, a faint glimmer, a distant shape against the horizon. It was undeniably a ship, and as it drew imperceptibly closer, a collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Lily was right. It wasn't just any ship. It was an identical copy of the Serenity. The same majestic silhouette, the same number of decks, the same pattern of warm, glowing lights from the windows. It sailed parallel to them, a perfect twin in the vast emptiness of the ocean. The initial amusement among the adults quickly evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of unease. A reflection shouldn't be that far away, and it certainly shouldn't have its own wake. The captain, a seasoned mariner with decades of experience, was summoned to the deck. He stared at the phantom vessel through his binoculars, his face growing grim with every passing second. He scanned the radar, nothing. He tried the radio-only static, answered his calls. The other ship was there, plain as day. Yet according to all his instruments, it was a ghost. As the crowd on the deck grew larger, a strange silence fell over them. The music had stopped. The laughter had died. All eyes were fixed on the silent doppelganger. Then, something happened that turned their unease into pure, cold terror. On the deck of the other ship, figures began to appear. Silhouettes, just like them, standing at the railing. And then, in perfect, eerie unison, the figures on the other ship raised their hands and waved. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was slow, deliberate, almost mocking. A wave that seemed to say, "We see you." Panic erupted. People screamed, stumbling back from the railing. This was impossible. This was a nightmare made real. The captain's voice, strained but firm, cut through the chaos. "Everyone, below deck. Now, seal the portholes. Draw the curtains. Do not look outside." His crew, though visibly shaken, followed his orders, herding the terrified passengers inside. The heavy doors to the outer decks were locked, and a heavy, suffocating silence filled the ship's lavish interior. For hours, they waited in the dimly lit lounges and cabins. No one spoke. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic thrum of the Serenity's engines, a sound that was usually comforting but now felt like a ticking clock. What was happening out there? Was the other ship still there? Was it getting closer? Every creak of the hull, every whisper of the wind, sent fresh waves of fear through them. They were trapped in a steel box, floating on a dark sea with a specter. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the curtains. The captain, looking older and wearier than he had just hours before, gave the all clear. Hesitantly, passengers and crew unlocked the doors and stepped back out onto the decks. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The sea was calm once more, and the other ship was gone. There was nothing on the horizon but the endless expanse of water. A collective sigh of relief washed over everyone. It was over. It must have been some kind of bizarre mirage, a trick of the light in mass hysteria. They tried to laugh it off, to rationalize it, to forget the chilling wave from their silent twins. Life on board the Serenity slowly returned to a semblance of normality. The music played again, meals were served, and people tried their best to put the night's terrifying event behind them. But a shadow of fear lingered, an unspoken question in everyone's eyes. It was Lily, the little girl who'd first spotted the ship, who made the next discovery. She was in her family's cabin, brushing her teeth. She looked up into the bathroom mirror, and then she screamed. Her parents rushed in to find her pointing a trembling finger at the mirror, her face pale with fright. Her father looked into the mirror, expecting to see his own reflection. He did, but behind him, in the reflection of the cabin, something was different. The window in the mirror didn't show the bright, sunny day outside. It showed a dark, starry night, and in the distance, on a black sea, was the silhouette of a ship with sails, a ghost ship drifting behind them. Panic spread like wildfire once more as people rushed to check their own mirrors. Every single reflective surface on the Serenity, the polished brass, the glass on picture frames, the decorative mirrors in the grand ballroom, even the dark screens of turned-off televisions showed the same impossible image. In the real world, it was day, but in the world behind the glass, it was an eternal night. And in that night, the ghost ship was always there, following. It wasn't a static image. The sails billowed in a phantom wind. The waves in the mirror world lapped against its hull. It was always keeping pace, a permanent passenger in their reflected reality. They tried covering the mirrors, but the moment they uncovered them, the ship was still there. They tried smashing a small mirror, but the shards on the floor each held a tiny, fractured piece of the ghostly vessel. The rest of the voyage was a living nightmare. People avoided their own reflections, terrified of what they might see. They moved through the ship like ghosts themselves, their gazes cast downward. The Serenity had become a prison, haunted not by a spirit, but by an inescapable image. When the ship finally docked, the passengers fled, leaving their luggage, their belongings, everything, in a desperate race to get off the haunted vessel. The story of the ship in the mirror became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. The Serenity was decommissioned, left to rust in a forgotten shipyard, its hundreds of mirrors still holding the image of its phantom twin. They say that even now, if you could find your way onto that decaying ship and look into one of its dusty, cracked mirrors, you wouldn't see your own face. You would see a dark sea, a starless sky, and a ship with tattered sails, forever drifting in the glass. A silent reminder of the night the ocean showed its reflection, and the reflection waved back. Thanks for listening to tonight's story. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tale. Until next time, be careful what you look for in the dark. Have you ever heard a whisper on the wind? A name that seems to come from nowhere. Tonight, I want to tell you a story, a chilling legend passed down through generations of sailors, a tale of the sea and a captain bound to it by a curse of memory. It's the story of the captain who never sleeps. Our story begins with a young sailor, new to the sea, his heart full of adventure and his head full of dreams. One night, rocked by the gentle sway of the ship, he drifted into a strange and vivid dream. He wasn't on his own vessel anymore. The wood under his bare feet was different, older, worn smooth by countless storms. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and something else, something ancient and sad. Before him, at the ship's helm, stood a figure silhouetted against a bruised, twilight sky. It was an old captain. His uniform was tattered, faded by sun and sea spray. His beard was long and white, like sea foam clinging to a rock. But it was his eyes that held the young sailor captive. They were wide open, staring out at the endless, churning ocean. Yet they seemed to see nothing at all. They were unfocused, like two pools of gray water reflecting a sky with no stars. A profound sadness emanated from the old man, a weariness so deep it felt like it was part of the ocean itself. The young sailor, though lost in this dreamscape, felt an inexplicable urge to speak. But before he could, the captain's voice drifted towards him on the wind. It was a soft voice, barely a whisper, cracked and dry like old parchment. "I cannot rest," the captain said, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "The sea demands its due, and I am its eternal servant." The young sailor was confused. Why couldn't he rest? The captain seemed to hear his unspoken question. He sighed, a sound like the tide pulling away from the shore. "As long as a single soul on land or sea remembers my name, I must sail. My memory is my anchor, my curse. To be forgotten is the only peace I can ever know." And then the captain spoke his name. It was a strange, melodic name, one the sailor had never heard before. It echoed in the vast emptiness of the dream, a single, haunting note. As the name faded, the dream dissolved. The old ship, the weary captain, the endless sea, it all vanished like morning mist. The young sailor shot upright in his bunk, his heart pounding against his ribs. The name, the captain's name, was still echoing in his mind, clear as a ship's bell in the fog. He couldn't shake it. He repeated it to himself, trying to place it, but it was completely foreign. It felt heavy on his tongue, like a secret he was never meant to know. The next morning, the sun was bright, the sea was calm, and the dream felt like a distant memory. But the name remained. It was a persistent hum in the back of his thoughts. At breakfast in the galley, surrounded by the familiar faces of his crewmates, he decided to ask. He approached the oldest member of the crew, a man named Silas, whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles from a lifetime at sea. "Silas," the young sailor began tentatively, "I had a strange dream last night about a captain named," and he spoke the name he had heard in his dream. The moment the name left his lips, a sudden silence fell over the noisy galley. The clatter of cutlery stopped. The boisterous laughter died. Every eye turned to him. Silas, the old crewman, went deathly pale. The color drained from his weathered face, and the spoon in his hand clattered onto the floor. His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were now wide with a primal fear. He grabbed the young sailor by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him into a corner, away from the others. "Hush, boy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You must never speak that name." "Never." "Why?" the sailor asked, his own fear now starting to rise. "It was just a dream." "Some dreams are more than dreams," Silas hissed, his eyes darting around as if the bulkheads themselves were listening. "That is a forbidden name on these waters. A cursed name, they say. They say he was a captain who made a dark pact with the sea for eternal life. But the sea is a cruel mistress. It gave him eternity, but took his rest." Silas leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "The legend says he can find his final harbor as long as his name is spoken, as long as he is remembered. Every time someone speaks his name, he knows you remember, and he will visit you in your dreams, showing you his endless, lonely boya. People who speak his name are said to become haunted by the sea, their minds slowly eroded by the sight of his eternal torment. That's why we let him be. We let him fade, hoping one day he'll be forgotten, and his soul can finally be free." The young sailor felt a cold dread wash over him, far colder than any ocean spray. He had not only remembered the name, he had spoken it aloud. He had tethered the ghostly captain to his own memory. He thought back to the captain's sad, empty eyes, the profound weariness that clung to him like a shroud. He hadn't understood the weight of the captain's words then, but he did now. That night, the young sailor lay in his bunk, dreading the moment he would fall asleep. He fought it for as long as he could, listening to the creaking of the ship and the rhythmic crash of the waves. But exhaustion eventually won, and as he drifted off, the dream returned. He was back on that ghost ship, standing on the deck under the starless sky. The old captain was there, at the helm, his back to him. The ship sailed on, through an endless, black sea. The captain didn't turn. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a silent sentinel on a voyage with no destination. The young sailor realized with a sinking heart that he was now a part of the captain's curse. He was one of the watchers. One of the rememberers. He dreamed the same dream the next night, and the night after that. Every night, he was a passenger on that silent, sorrowful ship. He saw storms that would have splintered any mortal vessel, and dead calms that stretched for an eternity. He saw sunrises and sunsets that painted the sky in colors of blood and gold, but none of it brought any joy. It was just a cycle, endless and unchanging. The captain never slept, and in his dreams, neither did the sailor. He was trapped in the captain's waking nightmare. His waking hours became a reflection of his nights. He grew gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a quiet, haunted look. His crewmates saw the change in him. They would look at him with pity, but also with fear. They knew he was now tied to the legend. He had spoken the name, and the sea had claimed a piece of his soul. The young sailor understood that he had two choices. He could let this curse consume him, wasting away until he was as much a ghost as the captain himself. Or he could try to find a way to break the curse, not just for himself, but for the weary soul of the captain who could not rest. But how do you make the world forget a name? How do you unspeak a word? That was the riddle he now had to solve, as he sailed the waking world by day, and the captain's haunted sea by night. His own voyage had just begun. Thank you for listening to this Legend of the Sea. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you do. On miss our next dive into the mysterious and the unknown. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever stared out at the sea on a perfectly still night, when the water is like a sheet of black glass? You feel a sense of peace, a quiet solitude. But what if that silence was broken by something that shouldn't be there? What if you saw a ship where no ship should be? This is the story of the ship that wouldn't fade, a tale that has been passed down through generations of sailors and lighthouse keepers, a chilling whisper on the salty air. Our story begins with an old lighthouse keeper named Silas. He was a man weathered by the sea, his face a roadmap of storms and sun. For 40 years, his lighthouse had been the unwavering sentinel of a treacherous coastline, a lonely beacon against the fury of the ocean. He knew every current, every rock, every trick the sea could play. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. One night, the sea was unnaturally calm. There wasn't a whisper of wind, not a ripple on the surface. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the only light was the sweeping beam from Silas's lighthouse, cutting through the profound darkness. Silas was in the lantern room, polishing the great lens, when a flicker of movement on the horizon caught his eye. He raised his old brass telescope, the one his father had given him, and focused it on the spot. His heart skipped a beat. It was a ship, a grand, three-masted schooner, the kind you only see in old paintings. Its sails were full, impossibly full, as if catching a gale-force wind that Silas couldn't feel. But the sea around it remained as still as a pond. The ship itself seemed to glow. It wasn't a bright light, but a soft, ethereal luminescence, like moonlight trapped within the very grain of its wooden hull. It moved with a silent, ghostly grace, gliding over the water without disturbing it. There was no sound of creaking wood, no snap of canvas, no shouts of a crew, just a profound, unsettling silence. A shiver traced its way down Silas's spine, a cold dread he hadn't felt since he was a young boy lost in a fog bank. This was wrong. All of his years at sea screamed that this was impossible. Ships need wind to move. They make noise. They leave a wake in the water. This vessel defied all logic, all laws of nature. He kept the telescope pressed to his eye, his knuckles white. He could see figures on the deck, a dozen or so, standing like statues. They were dressed in old-fashioned sailor's attire, their forms clear in the ship's strange light. But they didn't move. They didn't work the rigging. They didn't steer the helm. They just stood, perfectly still, facing forward, like an audience watching a play only they could see. Silas tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, a figment of his tired imagination. Maybe it was a reflection, a strange, atmospheric phenomenon. He lowered the telescope, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The ship was still there, closer now. He could almost make out the name on its bow, but the letters were faded and strange, written in a script he didn't recognize. He thought about sounding the foghorn, a standard procedure for an unidentified vessel in his waters. But his hand froze. A deep, instinctual fear held him back. It felt like shouting into a tomb. He felt as if he were an intruder, witnessing a private, spectral procession that was not meant for living eyes. As the ship drew parallel to the lighthouse, it was so close that Silas felt he could almost reach out and touch it. He scanned the deck again, desperately searching for any sign of life, any movement that would make this real. He saw a man at the ship's wheel, his hands resting on the spokes, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A woman stood by the rail, her long dress unruffled by any breeze, her face a pale oval in the gloom. None of them looked towards the lighthouse. It was as if the brilliant, sweeping beam of light, and the man watching from within it, simply didn't exist to them. The ship passed by, a silent phantom on a silent sea, and as it moved on, Silas noticed the most disturbing detail of all. It left no wake. The water behind it was as smooth and undisturbed as the water before it. It was like a dream slipping through the fingers of the world, leaving no trace, no proof it was ever there. He watched until the ship's faint glow was swallowed by the darkness, disappearing as mysteriously as it had arrived. The silence it left behind was heavier, more profound than before. Silas stood there for what felt like hours, the telescope still in his hand, his mind reeling. Was he going mad? Had the loneliness of the lighthouse finally cracked his sanity? He stumbled down the winding stairs to his small living quarters. He needed to write it down, to record what he had seen in the official logbook. It was his duty, but when he reached his desk, his blood ran cold. The logbook, which he always kept closed and weighted down, was open. It was open to a fresh page, and on that page, in a neat, careful script of black ink that was utterly unlike his own hurried scrawl, was a single, chilling sentence. It read, "We are still sailing." The next morning, the sun rose on a perfectly normal sea. The waves lapped gently against the rocks. Seabirds cried overhead. It was as if the night's impossible vision had never happened. Silas checked the shipping lanes, the weather reports, the Coast Guard channels. There was no record of any ship, let alone a three-masted schooner, in his sector that night. No other sightings were reported. But the entry in his logbook was real. The ink was dry, the words stark against the white page. We are still sailing. Who were we? Where were they sailing to? For how long had they been sailing? The questions haunted him. He showed the logbook to no one. Who would believe him? They would say the old keeper had finally lost his mind. But Silas was never the same. Every night, he watched the sea with a mixture of terror and fascination. He would scan the horizon, half hoping, half dreading, to see that faint, ghostly glow again. He never did. But sometimes on the calmest nights, when the air was deathly still, he thought he could hear a faint, faraway whisper on the edge of hearing a sound like a sad, timeless melody carried on a wind that wasn't there. Years passed. Silas retired, and a new, younger keeper took his place. Silas left the logbook behind, tucked away in a drawer. He never spoke of what he saw, but the memory of the silent ship and its motionless crew was seared into his soul. The new keeper, a young man full of modern skepticism, found the old logbook one day while cleaning. He flipped through the pages of weather reports and routine entries until he found it. The strange, elegant handwriting. "We are still sailing," he chuckled, assuming it was a joke left by the old man, a bit of sailor's folklore. But then, one night, a calm and moonless night, just like that one years ago, he was in the lantern room when he saw it, a faint glow on the horizon. A ship with full sails on a windless sea. Figures on the deck, standing perfectly still. A silent vessel, leaving no wake. And the next morning, when he rushed to the logbook, he found it open to a new page. Beneath Silas's entry, in the same careful ink, was a new line. It said, "The sea is calm tonight." And so it continues. The legend says that every keeper of that lighthouse, sooner or later, becomes a witness. They see the ship. They find the logbook. And each time a new line is added, a new fragment of an eternal, ghostly voyage. The ship that wouldn't fade continues its journey through the nights, its silent crew forever bound to their vessel. They are still sailing, through an ocean of time, their story written not in the waves, but in the frightened hands of those who watch from the shore. So if you ever find yourself by the sea on a still, quiet night, look out into the darkness, and if you see a faint light where no light should be, don't be too quick to dismiss it. You might just be bearing witness to a journey that never ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the unknown. And let me know in the comments below if you've ever had a strange or unexplainable experience by the sea. Stay curious and stay safe. Have you ever heard a sound that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? A sound that didn't belong. For the crew of the Sea Serpent, a humble fishing trawler, that sound was a bell. It wasn't the sharp, urgent clang of a buoy, but a slow, mournful toll, like a funeral procession on the water. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, muffled by the thick, disorienting fog that had swallowed the sea. The fog was a living thing that morning. It clung to the boat, cold and damp, blurring the line between the sky and the water until the world was nothing but a swirling gray void. Visibility was almost zero. The captain, a seasoned mariner named Elias, gripped the helm, his knuckles white. He and his crew were navigating by instruments and instinct alone, the low thrum of their engine the only familiar sound in an unearthly quiet world. Then the bell began. They were miles from any shipping lane, far from any known bell buoy or church on shore. Elias cut the engine, and the boat drifted in the eerie silence, broken only by the lapping of water against the hull and that persistent, ghostly bell. It was a sound that spoke of age, of sorrow, and of something ancient lurking just beyond their sight. Slowly, a shape began to resolve itself in the thick mist. It wasn't a modern vessel. This was something else entirely. A massive silhouette, dark and foreboding, loomed out of the gray. Its lines were archaic, its masts tall and skeletal against the fog. It was a galleon, a ship from a bygone era, its wood dark and splintered, looking as if it had been soaked in brine for centuries. The air grew colder, a deep, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. There, at its bow, a single lantern swung back and forth, its light a sickly, pale yellow, but no hand held it. The decks were empty. The sails, tattered and ripped, hung like ghostly shrouds, yet they seemed to billow with a wind that the crew of the Sea Serpent couldn't feel. As the phantom ship glided silently past them, its sheer scale was breathtaking and terrifying. This was no ordinary vessel. It was a legend made real. It was the Flying Dutchman. Every sailor knows the Thalys, the cursed ship doomed to sail the oceans for eternity, never making port. A harbinger of doom, an omen of disaster for any who lay eyes upon it. The crew of the Sea Serpent were frozen, a mixture of awe and primal fear rooting them to the spot. They watched as the spectral galleon passed, the mournful bell continuing its rhythm. It felt as if the ghost ship was looking right through them, its presence a heavy weight on their souls. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the Flying Dutchman began to fade. It didn't sail away into the distance. It dissolved back into the fog, its form becoming translucent, until it was just a ghostly outline. And then, nothing. It was gone. And with its disappearance, the tolling bell finally stopped. The silence that returned was even more profound than before, thick with unspoken dread. What did it mean? Were they now cursed? Was a storm about to break? Just as the crew began to process what they had just witnessed, something changed. A breeze stirred, faint at first, ten-string air. It began to tear at the edges of the fog, pulling it apart like cotton. Within moments, shafts of sunlight broke through, and the dense gray curtain that had imprisoned them began to lift. The sea and sky were revealed once more, and it was then that they saw it. Directly in their path, no more than 100 yards ahead, was a jagged spine of black rock breaking the surface of the water, a treacherous, uncharted reef that would have ripped their hull to shreds. It was invisible in the fog, a hidden death trap they had been sailing straight towards. Elias, his face pale, spun the helm hard. The engine roared back to life as the Sea Serpent turned sharply, its bow swinging away from the deadly rocks with only moments to spare. They coasted past the reef, close enough to see the white water churning furiously around its sharp edges. Leaning against the railing, their hearts still pounding, the crew looked back at the empty stretch of water where the ghost ship had been. The fog was almost completely gone now, revealing a clear, calm sea under a bright morning sun. It all felt like a dream, but the reef was real. The danger had been real, and suddenly they understood. The bell wasn't a funeral toll for them, it was an alarm. The swinging lantern wasn't an empty, haunting light. It was a beacon. The Flying Dutchman, the legendary omen of doom, had not come to haunt them or curse their voyage. It hadn't been hunting them at all. It had been warning them. The ghost ship, a legend whispered in fear for centuries, had just saved their lives. They never saw the ship again, but for the rest of their days, whenever a fog rolled in, they didn't just feel fear. They felt a strange sense of gratitude, and they listened closely for the slow, steady toll of a phantom bell, the sound of a guardian angel from the deep. Sometimes, the things we fear the most are not what they seem. Legends are born from truth, but their meaning can get lost in the mists of time. What other ghostly tales might have a different side to their story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the edge of our world.